This video will cover the third noble truth, or Nirvana. So at this point, you should have already read the Four Noble Truths in Rahula, completed the reading questions, the quiz, and also watched the video on the first two noble truths. Otherwise, this won't make much sense. Uh, Nirvana, or the third noble truth, the chapter on that in Rahula actually begins with a story between a turtle and a fish. So I'll cover everything on this board in clockwise manner, so don't worry about absorbing all of it right away. So we'll just begin with that story. So at the beginning of the chapter, there's this exchange that happens between a turtle and a fish. And so the turtle comes up to the fish, and the turtle goes, "Oh, I just went for a walk." And the fish goes, "I totally know what you mean. It's just like swimming. I just did that too." And the turtle's like, "No, it's not really the same as swimming." And the fish is like, "Yeah, I know. It's exactly like swimming. Like you flap your fins like this, you move through water. It's just like swimming." And the turtle's like, "No, it's really not like that, actually. You don't use fins, you use legs. You're on the land. It's not wet. It's a pretty different experience." And the turtle's like, "Oh, I get it. It's like how when you swim, you go through water and you move like this." And the turtle's like, "No, it's really not like that. It's actually pretty different from that." And so I begin with this story, and Rahula does as well, because talking about nirvana is often like this. We often find ourselves in the position of the fish. We keep saying things like, "Oh, nirvana is like this experience that I've had." And actually, it's not. The other issue is that it's an extra linguistic experience, meaning it's not contained in the bounds of language. Language can't really express it. And so we're trying to use language to express something that really can't be expressed using words. Nonetheless, we try because as human beings, that's what we have available to us. So in the chapters you've already seen, Rahula says that nirvana is both can be defined in positive and in negative terms. So positive and negative don't mean good and bad here, but they simply mean what it is and what it is not. So the negative is what it is not. So nirvana is the extinction of, or you could say the absence of, thirst, desire, etc. Or you could say positively, nirvana is freedom, liberation from suffering. So if the first noble truth is that we suffer, the second noble truth is the source of that suffering. The third is the liberation or the freedom from that suffering. So how that happens is through a realization called nirvana, and the realization is of the absolute truth in Buddhism. So you get a definition of this in Rahula. I believe it's on page 52 at the bottom. The absolute truth from a Buddhist perspective is that nothing is absolute. Rather, everything we experience as human beings is impermanent, fleeting. Everything is impermanent, everything is interconnected or relative, and everything is conditioned, meaning it has conditions for its arising. If something has conditions for its arising, then it also has conditions for its passing away, which means that it's not permanent. So if we realize this absolute truth, that nothing in our experience is absolute, that everything in our experience is impermanent, fleeting, subject to change, then that leads to the extinction of thirst or desire. In other words, when I realize that every experience I have is fleeting, then I don't desire for it to remain. I just enjoy it as it is and allow it to pass away. So in the previous example I gave, or the video I gave the example of the weather. Often we have such a strong desire for the weather to be a particular way that you'll hear people, on a day when the weather is maybe not their optimal choice, say, "Oh, it was nicer yesterday when it was like this," or "I wish it were a little bit warmer today." And when we do that, when we say that, "I wish it was a little bit warmer, I wish it was a little bit sunnier, I wish the wind wasn't blowing so hard," then we desire something that is not in this present moment. We thirst for something that, strictly speaking, doesn't exist, and we are no longer in this present moment. So another way of thinking about nirvana is to be fully in the present, not to be wishing for some future that doesn't exist, not to be reliving some past that also no longer exists, but to simply be here with what is. And to realize that that which is, that which I experience right now is fleeting. So to enjoy the beautiful sunny day, to soak in the rays of the sun, but to know that that experience is fleeting, that it can't be held on to. So, with this realization that everything we experience, our own bodies, our own thoughts, our own emotions, other people, their thoughts, their emotions, if all of that is fleeting, then that changes our grip. We kind of have a loosen our grip and let go a little bit. We let go of that thirst, that desire. The other thing we realize isn't permanent is ourself. There is no permanent soul. There is no permanent self from a Buddhist perspective. So nirvana is also the letting go of the false illusion of a permanent self. And rather, instead of having an illusion of a self, of who I am and what I ought to be, and this kind of narrative I have about myself, I just experience my body and mind, thoughts and emotions and feelings in a moment to moment awareness. If there's no self, you also get rid of the problem of greed, of accumulation. There's no self that needs to accumulate. There's no self that needs to have. And if the other is also changing all the time, it's a lot more difficult to hate. So nirvana, perhaps in the most simple terms, is to just see things as they are. To just be with reality as it is. Of course, if everything we experience, everything in reality is constantly fleeting, changing, then that means that to experience nirvana is to experience a moment-to-moment awareness. And because this is not something that can really be captured by language, this is something that has to simply be experienced. So I encourage you, as I encouraged you before, that this unit is really about doing the practices. And you can practice mindful awareness, that is moment-to-moment awareness, doing any activity, but it's best to start with the really simple activity of just sitting quietly for 10 minutes. Then you can work it into walking meditation, laying down meditation, doing the dishes meditation, laundry meditation. And the idea is to be with the body moment to moment, to be with the emotions moment to moment, to be with the thoughts moment to moment, and really just observe whatever is. And you can use a kind of mantra to emphasize the seeing things as they are right now, which is, this is how it is for me right now. Just this is how it is right now. It won't be like that in the future, and it wasn't like that in the past. And so you can already see how living in this present moment awareness would alleviate suffering. If we simply are here now, we're not worried about what happens in the future. We're not reliving the story of the past, but we're just living in a kind of mindful awareness of what really is here now. So I encourage you to do those practices as we go through this unit, and to share them and write about them, and think about what you learned from it. Because the idea with the absolute truth in Buddhism, just to say one last thing to wrap up this video, is that the realization of this truth is something immediate and personal. It's something that anyone can do. And it's not something you're supposed to believe me about, or the Buddha, or Rahula, or any teacher, but rather through the practice of paying attention. Any human being has the ability, the capacity to recognize this truth themselves. So don't believe me, don't just memorize it, but check it out. When you meditate, do you notice this truth that nothing is permanent, that everything is fleeting? Or, on the other hand, is there something permanent in your experience? And if so, what is that permanent thing?